Welcome back to the Bearded Console Gamer, and today I'll be giving you my review of the single-player campaign for Motive Studios' latest title, Star Wars Squadrons. We'll be talking gameplay mechanics, mission design, and generally discussing the strengths and weaknesses of the campaign while avoiding major plot spoilers. If you liked the video, please remember to like and subscribe as it's a new channel and it helps out a lot with making future content. In terms of gameplay, Squadrons is definitely closer to an honest-to-god flight sim than, for example, the Starfighter Assault mode in Battlefront 2, but it isn't as involved as the more fetishistically complex spaceflight games like Frontier Development's Elite Dangerous. Instead, it hits a sweet spot between the two that I found incredibly satisfying and deep enough to keep me interested for hours on end. The visuals are solid and at points stunning, especially considering that the game was a relatively low-budget title and that you can pick it up for the low price of $40 US. First up, it's important to say that the combat section of this game take place 100% inside the cockpit. There's no option for a third-person view, and I personally love that design move as it makes the entire experience more immersive. A huge amount of care has clearly gone into sculpting each and every one of the distinctive Starfighter cockpits, and those beautifully retro sci-fi consoles and monitors aren't just there for show. At the beginning of the game, you're given the choice between having a standard or instruments-only experience. The latter, which I highly recommend, will turn off all of the floating HUD elements and force you to fly solely by relying on the physical panels inside the Starfighter. Take a look around your cockpit and you'll be able to pick out a weapon charge indicator, a radar, a speed dial, and a screen that displays the health of your fighter and its shields. There's also a power management gauge, a boost level, and a series of displays to keep track of the amount of consumables you have, like missiles and chaff, and whether they're currently usable. Choosing the instruments only option definitely presents a greater challenge, especially to new players, as you'll have to manage all of the different elements while also piloting the ship, keeping track of your enemies, and generally trying not to die. But it also massively increases immersion by drawing you further into the cockpit. One of the core mechanics of the game that helps separate Squadrons from the more shallow arcade-style flight games is the power management system. In every fighter you pilot in Squadrons, you'll have the ability to shift power between subsystems, which gives an extra layer of depth and flexibility to your flight style. New Republic ships have three main subsystems: shields, weapons, and engines. Throwing max power into engines will make you faster and more maneuverable and also allow you to build up a boost, which can be triggered with the press of the L3 button. Cutting your power and turning while in boost throws you into a drift, which lets you quickly turn on a potential pursuer. Incidentally, throttling down to half thrust also gives your ship a tighter turning circle. Meanwhile, maxing out weapons will allow your lasers to fire for longer, and pumping power to shields will allow you to build up a sturdier overshield. On an even deeper level, the shield priority can be set either forward or backward, and reset via the D-pad. So if you're undertaking a frontal assault on a capital ship, you're going to want to throw those shields forwards, but if you're in a dogfight and someone's on your tail, you're going to want to throw them back. Meanwhile, Empire ships don't have any shielding at all, but are faster, more maneuverable, and have hardier hulls than their Rebel counterparts. They also have the ability to emergency shunt power between engine and weapon systems, which adds to their already impressive handling and lets them pack a punch when they need it the most. These gameplay mechanics aren't all that new. For example, Free Space 2 had power and shield management options all the way back in 1999, but they are well implemented in Squadrons, and any player hoping to get good at the game is going to need to get used to transferring power on the fly to fit their ever-changing laser-filled situation. And you'll also want to handle those situations differently depending on the type of ship that you're flying. During the later missions in the campaign and from the outset in multiplayer, you'll have the option of piloting either a fighter, an interceptor, a bomber, or a support ship. Fighters, like the classic X-Wing, are good all-rounders, while interceptors are geared towards hunting down fighters. Bombers, as the name would suggest, excel at dealing heavy damage, but are relatively slow, while support ships can buff allies with a range of abilities such as an overshield. All of the above ships can be customized with a variety of lasers, missiles, engines, shields, and hulls in order to suit your preferred playstyle. For more on this, check out my earlier video which I'll link to at the end. By the way, as an added bonus for PlayStation fans, you can play the entire game in VR, which sounds like an incredibly immersive option, but sadly one that I can't comment on as I chose to play the game on my Xbox, mostly just because I can't stand to be away from my beautiful white Elite controller. But keeping it on a personal level, when I first started the game the preset controls felt a little bit off to me, and I had to spend some time tweaking and remapping them in order to make it feel right. So if the feel of the game initially hits you wrong, don't be afraid to play around with it, especially since you can return the bindings to their default positions with the touch of a button. But take the time to get it right, and piloting a starfighter in Squadrons feels incredible. The game is a freaking gift to Star Wars fans or anyone else with a passing affection for sci-fi or flight sims. If you don't get a sweaty-palmed adrenaline rush upon finding yourself skimming tight above the hull of a Star Destroyer while avoiding turbo laser blasts, then I'm afraid there may be something wrong with you on a very deep psychological and physiological level, so you should see a doctor. All of the different elements of Squadrons just come together to make for an extremely satisfying core gameplay experience. For new players, the roughly 8-hour single-player campaign is the perfect place to start your Squadrons career. Initially, I had only intended to play through the first couple of missions of the story mode to get a handle on the controls before jumping into multiplayer. That's not how it worked out. The Squadrons campaign is, frankly, orders of magnitude better than I had expected it to be, and arguably better than it needed to be considering that most players will be primarily interested in the multiplayer offering. Squadron's story is set in the aftermath of the events of Return of the Jedi, which saw the destruction of the second Death Star and the death of Emperor Palpatine at the mechanical hands of his passingly famous apprentice. You'll take control of two characters, a pilot for the New Republic and a combat ace fighting for the splintered Galactic Empire. Over the course of 16 missions, you get to experience this unfamiliar part of the Star Wars saga from both perspectives. Whilst the Empire lost a lot of its power and unity in the events that led to the fall of Palpatine, it still had a massive fleet with which to wreak revenge on the rebels who had recently rebranded themselves as the New Republic. The conflict in Squadrons is centered around the secretive Starhawk project, which, if completed, could help the New Republic gain the upper hand in their fight against the Empire. The campaign features tons of famous ships and settings from the Star Wars lore, and will even have you encounter some familiar faces, though not as many as I personally would have liked. Like, there are some characters there which really should have been in it and could have easily been in it, but they just didn't put them in it. And I can't say any more because my hands are tied because of spoiler stuff. The vast majority of the game is spent in the cockpit, but there are sections immediately before and after missions where you interact with your squad mates and receive briefings on the battle ahead. It's kinda disappointing that you can't freely move around in the hangar, and instead you're rooted to the ground with points of interest dotted around that allow you to inspect your starfighter or talk to NPCs. The static nature of these sections suggests that they were designed to make the VR aspects of the game as comfortable as possible. NPC conversations are more often than not a little cringy, but they do add flavour to the story and can be pretty charming with the exception of the lizard who looks like he wants to eat my face. The short briefings clustered around holotables also help give the campaign a nice ebb and flow, which prevents it from descending into a jamboree of mindless laser blasting. The campaign also does a good job of introducing the strengths and weaknesses of the starfighters and drip feeding the player new skills. By the end of the campaign, I actually felt pretty confident and was happy to see that those skills had transferred and that I could hold my own in the multiplayer. That said, the drip-feeding nature of the campaign brings with it a degree of restriction, in that you have no option as to what you can fly until later in the story, even on your second playthrough, and your ability to customize your playstyle with modules is seriously limited compared to the multiplayer. But again, this opens up later in the story. By the way, on a side note, a lot of the footage here I captured from the multiplayer modes, as I didn't want to ruin any of the campaign game settings. Some of them just look great. But back to customization, beyond picking some basic options for your pilot at the beginning of the campaign, you don't have any aesthetic customization options for either your starship or your flight suit. Again, that opens up in multiplayer, but that's for a different video. On the bright side, the campaign does have some limited potential for replayability, especially for completionists, as each mission has a set of medals that you can collect by completing various challenges on various difficulties. Overall, I was impressed with the quality of the single-player campaign, even more so because most people are going to buy it for the multiplayer offering. In that sense, Squadrons is definitely more story-focused than I had expected. Sadly, the game's lifespan has been limited by EA's announcement that they have no plans to support the game with further DLC or treat it as a live service by drip-feeding new content for cash. In an interview with UploadVR, Squadron's creative director Ian Fraser stated, "We don't want to say it's almost done and then dribble out more of it over time, which to be honest is how most games work these days. So we've tried to treat it as a kind of old school approach, saying, you paid the $40, this is the game and it's entirely self-contained. We're not planning to add more content, this is the game and we hope you understand the value proposition." That's a refreshing take from EA, which makes me even more certain that we're no longer living in the prime reality. But the game would really have benefited from one more ship in each class and a few extra modes and maps for multiplayer to give it longevity, but I'll get into that properly in a later video. It is worth noting that there is a ray of hope for Squadrons fans, as in the same interview Fraser caveated his comments with the phrase "never say never." And that's all for my review of Star Wars Squadrons campaign and gameplay. I don't score games out of 10, but suffice to say, the story mode delivers an enjoyable and engaging experience that punches well above its $40 price tag and is complemented by tight, well-balanced and immersive core gameplay. Let me know what you thought of Squadrons in the comments, and also let me know if you'd like to see a follow-up video detailing what I think Motive and EA need to do differently with the next Star Wars Squadrons game, if we get one, which I really hope we do. If you like the video, please remember to like and subscribe, and if you're looking to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee through the link in the banner. Stay tuned for more reviews, reactions, and news from around the gaming world.